No, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's kind of at the core of the problem of what he said, which is that a lot of the people who have been complaining about the Phillies and the lack of a plan, or the plan that may or may not be in place, were saying 2 years ago that this rebuilding needed to begin. And Ruben himself didn't recognize that, and the franchise didn't recognize that. So people are understandably skeptical when he says, oh, there's a plan in place and we know what we're doing to get things back on track. I mean, never mind the fact, that the language that he used, and that he's been around here long enough to know that there's never anything to be gained by speaking about Philadelphia sports fans, any segment of them in that regard, if you're an executive in town.
Mike, obviously, he says they don't understand the game. They don't understand the process. There's a process, and then they bitch and complain because we don't have a plan. There's a plan in place. We're sticking with the plan. And then his apology is, I'm not really taking a shot at the fans. They just don't understand the process. Is this a guy who's frustrated? Is this a guy who has some pressure on him? I mean, is that why he breaks down? I mean, it seems like a random time to just kind of lash out.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think he was speaking with a reporter, and Jim Salisbury from Comcast Sportsnet, who he's known a long time and is very comfortable with, and probably let his guard down a little bit. And yeah, almost certainly he's frustrated. I'm sure at some level he feels like, hey, in the first 3 years I was a general manager, the team went to the World Series. It won 3 straight division titles. The regular season record got better each year, to the point that we won 102 regular season games in 2011. And where does that get me? That doesn't get me any kind of grace period here. And I think I deserve a grace period. I'm sure he feels that way at some level. But the bottom line is that people could see this decline coming, and they were adamant in the Phillies' need to address it, and nobody with the Phillies did. They doubled down on Ryan Howard and that same core of superstars that had carried them to the World Series in 2008 and in 2009. So, there's a lot of kind of comeuppance here, I think, for Ruben, and saying, well, we need to be patient now. And people are saying, hey, we were willing to be patient 2 years ago and you didn't want to. And now you're upset at us because we were right and you were wrong.
Mike Sielski is with us here. Mike, do you have a feeling, and you see what he says, and you kind of hear his retort a little bit here, do you kind of feel that maybe deep down somewhere that he feels like he does have a little bit of latitude because in 2009 they went to the World Series and that he brought back Cliff Lee and that he got Roy Halladay? Do you think that he is entitled to more than the fans are giving him?
I really don't, because for all the good things that Ruben did during that period, and particularly in 2009, he made some very good moves in season and before that season to put the Phillies in position to compete for a World Series championship. You go back to Chan-Ho Park and Pedro Martinez and moves like that that really helped the Phillies out that year. But the bottom line is this: is that they were slow to understand just how close the expiration date on that whole run was coming, and they needed to make some hard decisions at the time, and they weren't willing to make them. And not only weren't they willing to make them, they were kind of haughty about their reasoning behind why they wouldn't make them. I've written this before. It was almost like they were a kind of a ne'er-do-well that happened to win the lottery, and all of a sudden they didn't know what to do with all this money, and they acted like they were offended that other people might know how to spend the money or save the money or invest the money better than they did. And the fact of the matter is they needed to start turning that team over after it failed in 2011, and they didn't do that. And they acted like it was beyond the pale to suggest that they should have been done. And I think in hindsight, everybody can say, the people who said they should have turned the team over were right and the Phillies were wrong. So, whether Ruben feels like he's got that sort of vote of confidence or grace period from the Phillies ownership, I'm not sure that he does, and I'm certainly not sure that he deserves it after what's happened in the last 3 years. It's not just that they got bad, it's that it was predictable and preventable, and they didn't do anything about it.
Mike, don't you find it ironic that he's saying that the fans don't understand, they don't understand the process, yet it's the same fans that wanted them to break this thing up a couple of years ago, and Ruben said maybe we should have broken it up a couple of years ago, so maybe the fans who were saying that you should have done it then, maybe they did know what they were talking about.
Yeah, those fans who said that did. I do think Ruben is talking, and if you read the entire interview that he had with Jim Salisbury, the context is that Jim was asking him about Aaron Nola and Zach Eflin, and I do think there is a segment of the fan base that is out there just saying, hey, bring these guys up because the team is lousy and it'll be more interesting to watch them pitch. And they're not paying enough mind to factors like service time and, the arc of a pitcher's development and those sorts of things. And I do think Ruben, to some extent, is talking about those things because there is a relatively, this is going to be harsh, but there is a relatively ignorant portion of the fan base that just wants the team to be entertaining right now and be interesting, and is not necessarily thinking, is this necessarily the best thing for the franchise long term? I do think it's good for the franchise to wait on Aaron Nola and Zach Eflin, and it's okay for them to take their time bringing those guys up at the moment. But be that as it may, you cannot phrase it the way Ruben did, and you can't react with that kind of vitriol because you're just not in the position to react that way. The team hasn't been good for 3 years. It isn't going to be good for at least another 3 years, I would argue. And you don't see the other general managers or people in comparable positions in town to Ruben doing this. I mean, who's taken more abuse than Sam Hinkie with the Sixers? But you don't see him, reacting this way. Chip Kelly's gotten a lot of criticism this offseason for the changes he's made. You don't see him reacting this way. Ron Hextall is taking the Flyers in a new direction. You don't see him, kind of shouting back at anybody who says, hey, you're weird for hiring a college coach, to replace Craig Berube. And there's no reason that Ruben Amaro should have reacted this way either.
Yeah, Mike Sielski, columnist at Philly.com, the Philadelphia Inquirer here, looking at the comments from Ruben Amaro, and then, of course, he kind of apologized about the comments. And, obviously he's got to go out. He's doing all the fixing it and trying to, put the tape over the dam here a little bit. But obviously his credibility with the fans has been pretty poor from, I don't know about what point. When do you think it went wrong for Amaro? When do you think that people kind of looked at him and said, I'm not sure I buy into this guy?
I think probably with the start of the 2013 season. It's kind of been an arc of, people in and around baseball could see this coming. They could see that, that run of success the Phillies had was kind of hollow because there wasn't much behind it, and that they were committing to guys like Howard and Utley and Rollins and Ruiz for too long, and that they were, so I think it picked up momentum. I think once 2012 came and went, and then 2013 came around, and people were looking around saying, really, they're going to try to do this again with the same group? And then 2014 came around, and they really, again, it didn't work last time. So I think there's been kind of momentum has been growing for a while. And I do think some of this came about because of the relatively early playoffs. I think that really hurt. And again, the Major League Baseball playoffs can be a crapshoot. But the fact that team with 102 wins didn't make it out of the first round of the playoffs left people with a bitter taste in their mouths already, and what's happened since then has only amplified that.
Mike, let's look at where they are now then. He says we have a plan, that we're sticking to that plan, we're going to do what's best for the organization. Is what you see a plan, and are they executing it, to the point where that fans should give them an opportunity to prove it?
I haven't seen a plan, quote unquote, yet beyond just, hey, we're going to take our time with some young players. They're doing the right thing with those two pitchers, with Nola and Eflin. But the plan would have involved maybe working Cody Ashe out entirely in left field over the course of spring training instead of playing him at third base, starting him at the season at third base, and then sending him down to the minors to learn left field. You had all of the offseason and all of spring training to get him ready to play left field if you thought that's what you wanted him to do. I don't see a plan per se. I see, okay, well, we're going to try to get some young players up here, and hopefully we'll just turn over the roster as we trade Howard and Hamels and maybe Utley if he allows us to deal him. But I don't necessarily see a plan in the way that I see a plan with the Sixers, that I see a plan with the Eagles with respect to what Chip Kelly, the kind of player that Chip Kelly wants to bring in. I don't see that with the Phillies.
What do you make of his, because I agree with you on the Ashe thing. Like, how did they not see this coming? You got a third baseman in the minors. Eventually, now they keep telling us that, well, we didn't want to get that into Cody's head. We didn't think Franco was going to be ready, so we had to let Ashe was going to be our third baseman, so we had to let him play third base. Is that serviceable enough of an answer for you?
No, it's not serviceable enough for an answer for me. I mean, a plan is not, readjusting everything the instant something does, one small part of it doesn't go exactly according to plan. You don't, again, I kind of am using Hinkie here as a cudgel against Amaro, and I don't necessarily mean to, and I don't mean to suggest that the Sixers plan is guaranteed to work and will result in a championship or multiple championships. But there is a contrast here. I mean, you don't see, Sam Hinkie changing everything he's doing because the Sixers didn't get the Miami Heat's first-round pick in this year's draft or the Lakers' first-round pick in this year's draft. He's got a philosophy, and he's sticking to it for as long as he has to. I don't see that with the Phillies. I see, we're going to wring everything we can out of Utley, Howard, Rollins, and then, it's not working. I guess now we have to break it up, and we're going to try to get some young players. Well, that's not a plan. I mean, that's kind of resigning yourself to the reality of the situation. And being forced to do so because your original plan didn't work. I don't see some kind of overriding philosophy with the kind of player they're going to develop, the way they're going to go about acquiring those players, the kind of qualities they're looking for in these players. I don't see any of that.
What do you make, Mike, of then? I get the business side. Many people believe, though, that Aaron Nola may have been ready to come up last year. When he was drafted, he was the most ready guy. Probably could have pitched in September, probably should have had an invitation to spring training at the very minimum as a professional courtesy, probably could pitch here now instead of watching Sean O'Sullivan get blasted for 7. We know the business side of things, but then why would you take the most ready guy for the pros when you didn't need to rush a guy?
Well, I mean, rush is a relative term. I mean, I think you look at, for instance, the Mets drafting Matt Harvey in 2010 out of the University of North Carolina. He's in their minor league system less than 2 years before he's up pitching for them in the big leagues. Nola is still early in his arc as a professional. I think it would have been a little ridiculous to bring him up and pitch him in the majors last year or invite him to spring training at this point. He needed to go down there and show what he could do. He was a very, very good college pitcher, but he wasn't some kind of phenom that you needed to get up here. And even if he did, what difference is it going to make anyway? I mean, they're not good. They're going to be a lousy team whether Aaron Nola pitches now or for them or pitches in Reading. And the service time issue does matter. You want to control his rights as long as you possibly can, particularly if he's as good as you think he's going to be. And if he comes up later this season or starts in the rotation next season, that's still a pretty quick turnaround from a guy you drafted just last year.
No doubt. I mean, and some people would, I know Ruben was saying, well, he's not ready. Everybody uses this word, he's not ready. And then you would say, well, was Steven Strasburg ready? I know he was the number 1 pick, but Nola was 7. I mean, is there a huge difference between those two guys? Why in some teams' eyes are these guys ready or not ready? Or, you see a kid pitching for the Marlins you never heard of before he's 22 years old. Is that guy ready? I mean, I know the business gets in the way a lot. You don't want the service time to start. But are these guys better off pitching here in the professionals and maybe 2 or 3 years, and then by that 3rd year, they've already know this league in and out. They're professionals. They know the travel. They know all those things. Are you better off teaching them here than maybe making them go through the minor system?
Well, I think it depends on where you are as a team, too. I mean, the Nationals brought Strasburg up in part because they were gearing up to become a division-winning team in 2012. I mean, he was going to be part of a young core that was going to, as it turned out, supplant the Phillies as the class of the National League East, and they did that. The Phillies won the division. Strasburg debuts in 2010. Mm-hmm. The Phillies win the division again in 2011, and then the Nationals pretty much take over in 2012. So the Phillies don't have that young core. They don't have anything approaching a young core that's ready to start competing for division championships. So are you really going to bring Aaron Nola up now? Was he the same level prospect as Strasburg? I don't think, at the time, Strasburg was the be-all and end-all of of pitching prospects. He was striking out 14 in his debut. I don't know that taking the chance that rushing Aaron Nola up here, is necessarily going to give you a long-term benefit that you wouldn't get from keeping him at Reading for a little while.
We'll obviously see how this plays out, because it's kind of interesting that they went down to go watch him, and as Jason Stark on Friday said, when you go down to see a guy at AA, it's not to see if you're ready to move him to AAA. Typically, that's to say, hey, are you ready to pitch in the majors? So do you think that they're possibly considering that?
Sure, I absolutely think they're considering it. I mean, you have to consider it. Look at the crowds. I mean, they've already admitted that an entertainment factor and a loyalty factor was part of the reason that drove them to not trade guys like Utley, Rollins, Howard, Ruiz. Just because they now are faced with the reality of having to move on from those guys doesn't mean that they're not mindful of having to entertain the fans who are coming to the ballpark and to try to draw more people. Now, the question becomes, how long does that last? I'm sure if they call up Aaron Nola and he makes his first start at Citizens Bank Park, there might be a decent crowd because of the curiosity of seeing him pitch for the first time. After that, I think you'll see more of the same when it comes to a pretty sparse ballpark. So, are they considering it? I would bet my life that they are. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, and it doesn't mean that if it does happen, it's the best thing for Aaron Nola or the Phillies.
And then, of course, there's the thought process of, look, you're in Philadelphia, is building a team with the farm system and kind of waiting it out in this manner. Is that the best way to go about it, or is that the only way to go about it?
It's the only way to go about it. I mean, they're close to the Yankees, but they're not the Yankees. And the Yankees went through a long period of time where they were willing to trade away prospect after prospect after prospect in the demand to win now, because they're the Yankees and they're in New York, and that's what they have to do. Well, the Phillies did something very, very similar for a fairly long period of time, and they're paying the price for it now. You cannot continue to go out there and just sign free agents and sign veteran guys or trade for veteran guys, because the trend, this is the thing to keep in mind too, more and more franchises are locking up their good young players and pitchers to long-term contracts earlier, so that these guys don't get to free agency, so that other teams don't have the chance to steal them away. So the pickings when it comes to signing free agents are going to be slimmer and slimmer and slimmer, and have been over time, and will continue to be so. So the idea that the Phillies can just go out and spend a whole bunch of money in the offseason and fix all their problems because they're in Philadelphia and it's a big market is absurd on its face. They've got to rebuild this farm system. It is the way for a franchise to become good again.
I agree with that. Mike Sielski, sports columnist at the Inquirer and Philly.com. And the one question would be, as we mentioned, where it might have gone downhill for Amaro is when he traded Cliff Lee and said this was a baseball decision. Well, that one didn't get them anything back in return, and a lot of his trades have not worked out. Let's hope some of the ones he's made recently can help build it back up. We will see it all develop right before our eyes. And, Mike, he's got a lot of decisions to make at this trade deadline. I don't know that the fans are very confident that he's going to make the right decisions, but could this be a make-or-break time for him at this trade deadline? Is this maybe his job on the line, this trade deadline?
Well, I mean, I don't know how much of these decisions that they're going to have to make are being made by Amaro, and how many are being made by Pat Gillick, who is now Amaro's boss again. That's an interesting dynamic. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think Amaro's comments help him in terms of his job security. I don't think they help him at all. It's one thing to ask your fans to be patient. It's another thing to snap at them and be petulant with them. When you're asking them to be patient, especially when you put off asking them to be patient for 2 years. If I were Ruben Amaro, I'm not sure what kind of position he's in right now, and I'm not sure what kind of position I'm going to find myself in the next few months.
Mike Sielski, everybody, columnist. Read that full column about Ruben Amaro over at Philly.com, and he joined us here on 97.3. Always a pleasure, Mike. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike.